The rhythmic thud-thud-thud of the hammer against the splintered cedar wood was the only sound breaking the thick, humid silence of the late June afternoon. David Miller, 3080, a man whose hands were equally familiar with the polished brass of a fire engine nozzle and the rough grain of lumber, assessed the damage to the old property line. 3 panels of the fence separating his modest 2-bedroom bungalow from the sprawling, almost fortress-like estate next door had collapsed under the weight of a recent storm. It was more than a boundary. It was a line drawn between 2 vastly different existences in the quaint, old-money town of Oak Haven, Connecticut. On his side, peeling paint and the smell of engine grease and grilled hot dogs. On hers, an immaculate 7-acre landscape shrouded in ancient oaks and impenetrable secrecy. Amy Young's voice, a bright chime of 8-year-old innocence, cut through his focused effort. She was perched on the edge of the lawn, clutching a small, stuffed toy Dalmatian. David wiped a streak of sweat and sawdust from his brow with the back of a worn leather glove and offered her a tired smile. "Not today, sweetie. These old nails are mean. Why don't you just supervise?" Amy, his anchor and his entire world since his wife, Susan Garcia, had been lost to a sudden illness for years prior, accepted her role as foreman. Life as a single father and a lieutenant at Oak Haven S. Historic Fire Station 17 demanded a punishing schedule, leaving precious little time for home repairs. Yet, this fence had been bothering him. It wasn't just about his house. The broken planks looked directly onto the patio of his reclusive neighbor. David prided himself on being a good neighbor, and that meant fixing what he broke, even if the boundary was technically shared. He lifted a new 2x4, the scent of fresh pine overpowering the old, musty cedar. A quiet clearing of a throat brought him to a halt. Patricia Johnson, his neighbor, stood on her side of the newly repaired section. She was a woman in her early 40s, dressed in simple yet expensive linen, with auburn hair pulled back into a severe, practical knot. She was a widow, people whispered, living a solitary life after her husband's sudden passing, a parallel grief that David recognized instantly. They had exchanged curt nods and brief greetings in the 3 years she'd lived there, but never a conversation. "I apologize for the noise, Miss Johnson." David gestured to the partially reconstructed barrier. Patricia stepped closer, her deep green eyes fixed not on the fence, but on the effortless, confident way David handled the tools. "Please, call me Patricia. And you shouldn't apologize. You're doing my half of the work." She held out a tall glass of iced tea, beads of condensation running down the side. David hesitated, then accepted the glass, his calloused fingers brushing hers, surprisingly soft. Brief contact. Neighbors help neighbors. Patricia's gaze soft as she watched Amy retreat shyly behind David's leg, clutching the toy Dalmatian. "She's lovely. 8 years old next month." David laughed. A low, genuine sound that seemed to surprise Patricia. Patricia smiled faintly. "I saw your truck leaving the station this morning." "That's the one. The oldest in the city, the true heart of Oak Haven." He took a long, grateful sip of the sweet tea. "The work is getting tough, though. The city council keeps talking about merging us with the main downtown hub." He used air quotes, his expression turning sour. Patricia leaned against the wooden post, her demeanor outwardly calm, though a flicker of internal tension crossed her face, a ghost of recognition. Land development can be ruthless. Ruthless is the right word. We're fighting a giant company called Synergy Holdings. They've been scooping up every municipal plot they can, talking about building high-end mixed-use structures. They want the firehouse land. I'd lose my mind if they tore down that building. David shook his head, momentarily forgetting he was speaking to a near stranger. "No, it's all right." Patricia's voice was quiet, almost reflective. Passion is a rare commodity in the city. David finished securing the final plank, his movements deliberate and strong. The fence was solid now, standing tall and proud. It's not perfect, but it'll hold until the snow flies. That's a wrap on your half. I insist on paying you for your time, David. He gave her a decisive look, his blue eyes clear and unwavering. We're neighbors, Patricia. Patricia found herself laughing genuinely, a sound she hadn't made in a long, isolating time. Her heart, encased in layers of corporate armor and the chill of solitude, felt a momentary, unfamiliar warmth. I might take you up on that, Lieutenant, especially for the grilled cheese. And perhaps Amy could come over and see my library. Amy emerged from her hiding spot, her eyes wide with curiosity. "It has a sliding ladder," Patricia confided, and the deal was sealed. David looked at his neighbor, this reclusive widow who lived in a house that could swallow his whole block, and felt a strange pull. She was aloof. Yes, but there was an honesty in her quiet contemplation, a deep, resonant sadness he understood intimately. He denied absolutely none that the woman who now leaned against the newly fixed fence, admiring his simple, honest effort, was the chief executive officer and principal shareholder of Synergy Holdings, the same company that was currently drawing up demolition plans for his beloved fire station 7. The same woman who, in truth, already owned the deed to the entire plot of land his own modest home sat on, having purchased the block 2 years prior in a silent, massive acquisition package that had completely escaped his attention. She was the one holding the power to ruin his life with a single signature. But looking at his hands, seeing the integrity of his work, Patricia saw something she had sacrificed a long time ago: the value of a life built on service, not capital. It was a terrifying realization, a collision of worlds that she was not ready to admit, much less navigate. She simply nodded, accepted the warm thank you from David, and retreated behind the sturdy cedar, leaving a man utterly unaware that the woman he was just beginning to know held the key to his professional and personal fate. The visits started subtly, almost hesitantly, then became a routine woven into the fabric of their disparate lives. It began with Amy S.Y.'s fascination with Patesia, library, a 2-story room lined with leather-bound volumes that smelled of old paper and wealth. David would bring Amy over for an hour or so, ostensibly to browse the books. But in reality, he and Patricia would find themselves talking on the patio, sharing coffee that tasted infinitely better than the watery blend at Station 17. Their conversations were a stark relief from the demands of their respective worlds. David spoke of the camaraderie of the firehouse, the terror of a 5-alarm blaze, and the small, profound victories of saving a life. Patricia, in turn, spoke vaguely of long hours, travel, and the crushing weight of responsibility, carefully omitting the titles, the billions, and the power that defined her existence. She found herself utterly captivated by his grounded perspective. He saw her, she realized, not as the formidable CEO, the Iron Lady of Synergy, but as a slightly weary neighbor with a good book collection and a quiet sorrow. A shared sense of loss was the invisible bridge between them. David, who had channeled his grief over Susan into raising Amy and serving his community, recognized the similar, contained anguish in Patricia's eyes. One rainy Tuesday, while discussing a complex novel about legacy and inheritance, Patricia quietly confessed to David that she inherited her position unexpectedly after her husband, Simon, perished in a sudden, tragic accident 5 years ago. "I was a literature major, Davy. I ran a small poetry foundation. Suddenly, I was expected to command an empire. I had to grow up in a day," she confided, her voice thin. David simply nodded, a deep understanding passing between them. The losses change us. He didn't have to explain that the people were his crew and his daughter. As their relationship deepened, so did the external pressures on David. The situation of Fire Station 17 deteriorated rapidly. The city council officially voted to begin negotiations for the sale of the land, citing a non-negotiable offer from the acquiring company, which, of course, was Synergy Holdings. The local paper ran a front-page story featuring a glossy rendering of the proposed Synergy Tower, a structure that would overshadow every historical building in Oak Haven. David, as the most senior lieutenant and a beloved community figure, became the face of the opposition. He organized town hall meetings, gave fiery speeches, and was quoted everywhere condemning the corporate vultures trying to strip Oak Haven of its soul. During one of their evening talks, sitting by the stone fireplace in Patricia S. Liberia room that felt both intimate and overwhelmingly grand, David S. frustration boiled over. They're relentless, Patricia. This company, Synergy Holdings, they don't see a fire station. They see prime commercial real estate. They don't see history. They see profit margins. Patricia, internally reeling, kept her composure flawlessly, sipping her chamomile tea. Have you looked into who owns them? A woman named Patricia Johnson. The papers call her a recluse, a genius, a tyrant. Nobody ever sees her. The irony of his words, aimed unknowingly at the woman 3 feet from him, was a sharp, physical pain for Patricia. She felt the heavy weight of the lie, a deceit that now involved the livelihood and passion of the only man who had seen beyond her title. Her silence was too long. David noticed, "Sorry, I'm putting a damper on our book discussion." "No, David. It's important." Patricia's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had to act. She'd been too distracted by the refreshing simplicity of David and Amy's world, allowing her VP, Christopher Martinez, to run wild with the Oakhaven acquisition strategy. Christopher was ambitious, ruthless, and eager to prove himself. He saw the Oakhaven deal as his ticket to the presidency of Synergy. Patricia had deliberately avoided looking at the small-town specifics in the massive acquisition report, seeking an emotional buffer from the brutal decisions she had to make daily. The turning point came with a shattering abruptness. Patricia had promised David and Amy they would go to the historic Oakhaven Lighthouse Festival, a small annual event cherished by the community. But just hours before their planned meeting, her private phone, the one only used for highly veiled corporate crises, it was Christopher Martinez, her second in command, calling from the company's headquarters in the city. "Patricia, you need to be here immediately. The opposition to the Firehouse 17 deal is escalating." Christopher's tone was accusatory, lacking the usual deferential polish. "My private life is not up for discussion." Christopher Patricia was curt, fury mixing with dread. "Too late." The council vote went through. "Our bid is binding unless we trigger a massive breach of contract penalty, which would cost us $43 million. Christopher paused, his voice dropping to a threat. "And Patricia, I'm afraid the board is concerned about your recent lack of focus. We have a crucial meeting with the Chicago investors tomorrow." Patricia knew the underlying message. If she didn't show up, Christopher would use her absence and her relationship with David to stage a corporate coup. She canceled the lighthouse trip with a hurried, vague text to David, explaining an unavoidable emergency. The disappointment in his response is simple. Understanding "be safe" felt like a moral failure. She flew back to the city that night, transforming back into the untouchable CEO. She spent the next 2 days in endless, high-stakes meetings, fighting off Christopher and the increasingly hostile board. She managed to negotiate a temporary delay on the firehouse demolition, but the sale was still in place. It was a partial victory that felt like a complete defeat. Meanwhile, back in Oakhaven, David was left reeling. Patricia's sudden, unexplained departure felt like an echo of the past, a reminder that the world of the wealthy was fickle and unreliable. He tried to focus on his work, but the shadow of Synergy Holdings loomed large. A chance conversation with a local property lawyer revealed a crucial, disturbing fact. The land deal involving the firehouse was part of a much larger, sweeping acquisition 2 years ago. Curiosity and a billing sense of unease drove him to dig deeper, using every contact and favor he had in local government. His investigation culminated late one night in his tiny office at Station 17. He found the original acquisition map, a highly confidential document leaked by a sympathetic town clerk. The map was color-coded, highlighting every single Oakhaven property now under the control of Synergy Holdings. His stomach dropped as his gaze landed on his own address, 121 Oak Street, the small, unassuming plot of land where his bungalow sat, where Amy's swing set hung from the old maple, where he had fixed the fence for a woman he was falling for, was marked with the same deep red of the acquired properties. The true owner of his home, his sanctuary, was Patricia Johnson. The deceit wasn't just about a fence or a fire station. It was about the very ground beneath his feet. He felt a white-hot wave of betrayal, a cold rage that threatened to consume the warmth Patricia had slowly kindled in his heart. Every conversation, every shared laugh, every empathetic look now felt like a calculated lie. He realized, with crushing clarity, that she didn't just know the consequences of Synergy's actions. She was the consequence. As David stared at the map, his phone buzzed. It was an urgent text from Patricia, sent from a private jet somewhere over the Midwest. "Patricia, David, I'm heading back. We need to talk. I just signed the papers to reverse the firehouse deal. It cost a fortune, but it's done. I couldn't let it happen. But I found something else, something I need to tell you about your property. I need you to trust me just for a moment longer." David crushed the phone in his hand, the screen illuminating the red-marked map on his desk. Trust was the one currency she didn't understand. She had bought his neighborhood, jeopardized his career, and, worst of all, betrayed the honest grief they had shared. He didn't need her to confess. He had the evidence. He decided he would wait. He would let her come home, and then he would ask her not about the land, but about the integrity she had pretended to possess. Before we proceed, a moment of reflection. If you were David, having just discovered the woman you are falling for owns your home and is destroying your community, would you choose to save the relationship or save your pride? Share your opinion and what you think is the hardest part for David to forgive in the comments below. Patricia landed at a small, private airstrip outside Oak Haven just after dawn. She didn't wait for her driver. She grabbed a single, nondescript document envelope from her briefcase and drove her own car Practica, unremarkable SUV, straight back to her estate. The moment she parked, she saw him. David was on his side of the fence, not fixing anything, but standing still, his firefighter's uniform stark against the morning light, his posture rigid and unforgiving. He held a crumpled sheet of paper, the acquisition map in one hand. Patricia walked across her manicured lawn and pushed open the newly repaired gate. The small, familiar, click-sounding, deafening in the charged silence. She approached him, ready to lay down her shield, ready to confess everything. David, I'm so sorry. I left abruptly. There was a huge situation with the board, but I handled it. I had to pay an enormous penalty. But Fire Station 17 is safe. The sales reversed. She spoke quickly, desperately, trying to get ahead of the truth, to show him that her integrity, however compromised, was still there. David didn't move. He didn't offer a smile or a thank you. His eyes, usually warm and comforting, were cold, reflecting the gray dawn sky. That's good news, Patricia. Patricia flinched. It wasn't a lie, David. I genuinely stopped it. I told Christopher to do it weeks ago, but he went rogue. She stepped closer, reaching out, but stopped as he subtly backed away. I know I've been dishonest about who I am. I wanted to tell you yesterday at the festival, but Christopher interrupted. I didn't want you to see me as the CEO. And you succeeded, David countered, his voice low and dangerous. I saw you as a friend, a person, maybe more. I shared my life, my grief, my daughter with you. He thrust the crumpled map at her. I know, Patricia. I know that you own the land my house sits on. Every story, every empathetic look was it, all a calculated risk. The severity of his hurt was a physical blow. She saw the total destruction of his trust, an emotion far more valuable than the land they stood on. No, David, absolutely not. I swear on Susan's memory, I didn't know until 2 days ago. It was part of a massive acquisition package from 2 years back. I barely looked at the details. I delegate land purchases. She opened the envelope she held, pulling out a newly signed, authenticated document and shoving it into his hand. This is the deed for 121 Oak Street. It's yours now. Transfer of ownership effective immediately. No cost, no strings, no mortgage. It's an act of restitution, not payment. I want the ground beneath your feet to be stable again, David. David S. fingers closed around the cold, official paper. The weight of the deed was immense. It was a kind of life-changing security he could never have afforded. Yet, it didn't immediately erase the betrayal. I don't want your charity I don't want a gift bought with the blood money of community displacement. You have it now, she pleaded, tears finally welling in her eyes, blurring the sight of his pain. The truth is that I am a CEO who got lost in the size of her empire. The truth is that I let an ambitious VP ruin a community I grew to love. The truth is that until I met you and Amy, I forgot what real purpose felt like. She paused, struggling to regain her composure. You fought Christopher for the fire station. I fought my entire board for it. I sacrificed a $70 million venture deal with Chicago investors because they wanted me to fire you and fast-track the Oak Haven project. I chose you, David. I chose Fire Station 17. David looked down at the deed, then back at her face, which was etched with exhaustion and genuine anguish. He was an expert at reading people in moments of crises, and he saw no calculation, only raw vulnerability. He saw a powerful woman who had just publicly humiliated herself and forfeited a fortune for the sake of integrity and a single firefighter. He asked, the rage finally beginning to recede, leaving a hollow ache. Fear, Patricia admitted simply. Fear that you would walk away. Fear that you would see me as the villain, which, in many ways, I was. My whole life is a gilded cage of isolation. You and Amy opened the door for me. David took a deep, shuddering breath, the scent of fresh-cut grass and distant wood smoke filling his lungs. My father always told me that forgiveness is a bridge, not a destination. He held out the deed. I accept this, not as a gift, but as your payment for the moral debt you incurred. But Patricia, I don't want my life to be a footnote in your corporate redemption story. Patricia gently pushed the deed back towards him. I'm stepping down as CEO of Synergy, at least temporarily. I'm putting a foundation in place, run by an ethical team. I'm staying here for Oak Haven, for the fire station, and for us. I want to try, David. He looked at the woman who had the strength to command thousands and the humility to confess her failure. He thought of Amy, who had only wished for them to ride their new bicycles together, a family of 3. The truth was, she had saved his firehouse, and she had given him his home. More importantly, she had shown him her heart, bruised and terrifyingly exposed. He took the deed and tucked it into his shirt pocket, over his heart. The fence is repaired, Patricia. He extended his hand, not for a handshake, but for a simple, honest touch. Patricia took his hand, her soft skin now pressed against his work-worn palm. They stood there, 2 people from 2 impossible worlds, finally united on the small piece of land he now owned, ready to start over. The silence between them was no longer filled with secrets, but with the quiet promise of a future they would build, plank by painful plank, together. Thank you for watching this story of courage, integrity, and the power of a second chance. We hope David and Patricia's journey reminded you that even the tallest walls can be dismantled by the simplest acts of sincerity. If this story resonated with you and you appreciate tales of human connection overcoming massive obstacles, we'd be so happy to have you join our community. Click the register button below to become a subscriber and never miss a story that moves the heart. We love hearing where our stories are traveling. Share in the comments which city you are watching this story from. Did you like this video? What was the biggest lesson you learned from Patricia's journey of stepping down from power to reclaim her humanity? We want to know.